humid atmosphere makes an ideal home for cacao. The bean, introduced in 1822, was not cultivated with diligence till 50 years ago. Today the two islands, which together have not half the area of Surrey, grow 32,000 metric tons of cacao a year, or about one-tenth of the world's production. The income of a single planter, once a poor peasant, has amounted to hundreds of thousands of sterling. Dotted over the islands, here nestling on a mountainside, there overlooking some blue inlet of the sea, are more than 200 plantations, or rocas, whose buildings look like islands in a green sea of cacao shrubs, above which rise the gray stems of such forest trees as have been left to afford shade. Here not only have the cultivation, fermentation, and drying of cacao been brought to the highest state of perfection, but the details of organization, planters' homes, hospitals, cottages, drying sheds, and Decauville railways are often models of their kind. Intelligent and courteous, the planters make delightful hosts at their homes 5,000 miles away from Europe. The visitor, who knows what it means to struggle with steaming virgin forests, rank encroaching vegetation, deadly fevers, and the physical and mental inertia engineered by the tropics, will marvel at the courage and energy that have triumphed over such obstacles. Calculating from various estimates, each laborer in the islands appears to produce about 1,640 pounds of cacao yearly, and the average yield per cultivated acre is 480 pounds, or about 30 pounds more than that of Trinidad in 1898. There is no available labor in San Thomé. The planters get their workers from the mainland of Africa. Prior to the year 1908, the labor system of the island was responsible for grave abuses. This has now been changed. Natives from the Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique now enter freely into contracts, ranging from 1 to 5 years, 2 years being the time generally chosen. At the end of their term of work, they either recontract or return to their native land with their savings, with which they generally buy a wife. The readiness with which the natives volunteer for the work on the islands is proof both of the soundness of the system of contract and of the good treatment they receive at the hands of the planters. Unfortunately, the mortality of the plantation laborers has generally been very heavy, one large and well-managed estate recording on average of 7 years an annual death rate of 148 per thousand, and many rocas still have more appalling records. Against this, other plantations only a few miles away may show a mortality approximating to that of an average European city. In February, 1918, the workers in San Thomé numbered 39,605, and the deaths during the previous year, 1917, were 1,808, thus showing on official figures an annual mortality of 45 per thousand. Comparing this with the 26 per thousand of Trinidad, and remembering that most of the San Thomé laborers are in the prime of life, it will be seen that this death rate represents a heavy loss of life, and justifies the continued demand from the British cocoa manufacturers for the appointment and report of a special medical commission. The Portuguese government is prepared to meet this demand, for it has recently sent a commissioner, Dr. Joaquim Goiva, to San Thomé to make a thorough examination of labor conditions, including work, food, housing, hospitals, and medical attendance, and to report fully and confidentially to the Portuguese colonial secretary. If this important step is followed by adequate measures of reform, there is every reason to hope that the result will be a material reduction in the death rate, as the good health enjoyed on some of the rocas shows San Thomé to be not more unhealthy than other tropical islands. Cameroons. The Cameroons, which we took from the Germans in 1916, is also on the west coast of Africa. It lags far behind the Gold Coast in output, although both commenced to grow cacao about the same time. The Germans spent great sums in the Cameroons in giving the industry a scientific basis. They adopted the estate plan, and possibly the fact that they employ contract labor explains why they have not had the same phenomenal success that the natives working for themselves have achieved on the Gold Coast. Various countries and districts, which are responsible for about 97% of the world's cacao crop, have now been named and briefly commented upon. Of other producing areas, the islands, Ceylon and Java, are worthy of mention. In both of these, as also in Venezuela, Samoa, and Madagascar, is grown the Criollo cacao, which produces the plump, sweet beans with the cinnamon break. Cacao beans from Ceylon or Java are easily recognized by their appearance because, being washed, they have beautiful clean shells. But there is a serious objection to washed shells, namely, that they are brittle and as thin as paper, so that many are broken before they reach the manufacturer. Ceylon is justly famous for its fine old red. Along with this a fair quantity of inferior cacao is produced, which, by being called Ceylon, such is the power of a good name, tends to claim a higher price than its quality warrants. Cacao markets. From the plantation to the European market. It is mentioned above that on the Gold Coast cacao is brought down to Accra as headloads, or in barrels, or in motor lorries. These methods are exceptional. In other countries it is usually put in sacks at the estate. Every estate has its own characteristic mark, which is stamped on the bags, and this is recognized by the buyers in Europe and gives a clue to the quality of the contents. There is not as yet a uniform weight for a bag of cacao, although they all vary between 1 and 200 count. Thus the bags from Africa contain 1 1/4 hundredweight, whilst those from Guayaquil contain 1 3/4 hundredweight. In these bags the cacao is taken to the port on the back of mules, in horse or ox carts, in canoes down a stream, or more rarely by rail. It is then conveyed by lighters or surf boats to the great ocean liners which lie anchored off the shore. In the hold of the liner it is rocked thousands of miles over the azure seas of the tropics to the grey-green seas of the temperate zone. In pre-war days 1,000,000 bags used to go to Hamburg, 750,000 to New York, 500,000 to Havre, and only a trifling 250,000 to London. Now London is the leading cacao market of the world. During the war the supplies were cut off from Hamburg, whilst Liverpool, becoming a chief port for African cacao, in 1916 imported 1,000,000 bags. Then New York began to gorge cacao, and in 1917 created a record, importing some 2.5 million bags, or about 150,000 tons. Whilst everything is in so fluid a condition, it is unwise to prophesy. It may, however, be said that there are many who think, now that the consumption of cocoa and chocolate in America has reached such a prodigious future, that New York may yet oust London and become the central dominating market of the world. Difficulties of buying. Every country produces a different kind of cacao, and the cacao from any two plantations in the same country often shows wide variation. It may be said that there are as many kinds of cacao as there are of apples, cacao showing as marked differences as exhibited by Crabs and Blenheims, not to mention James Greaves, Russets, Worcester Pearmains, Newton Wonders, Lord Derbys, Belle de Boscoups, and so forth. Further, whilst the bulk of the cacao is good and sound, a little of the cacao grown in any district is liable to have suffered from drought or from attacks by molds or insect pests. It will be realized from these fragmentary remarks that the buyer must exercise perpetual vigilance. Cacao sales. Before the Cocoa Prices Orders were published (March, 1918), the manner of conducting the sale of cacao in London was as follows. Brokers' lists giving the kinds of cacao for sale, and the number of bags of each, were sent, together with samples, to the buyers